with the team. Graduated and didn't have anything right away. Kind of went back and forth between the NBA and college, and decided that I had some GA opportunities and decided that I wanted to kind of explore the NBA route. So I took an internship, a basketball operations assistant position with the Sixers. Believe it or not, I was only there about 3 months. 3 months, excuse me. I was there like 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks or so, and got a call from the head coach at Santa Clara University that I had been recommended for his video coordinator spot, and he had a late opening, and wanted to touch base on it. And before I could even call back, a couple people from the Sixers staff came up to me and said, we were at training camp at the time, and said, "Hey, I think you should take the job at Santa Clara." And I'm thinking to myself, like, how can that even be that you guys know? Because I haven't even called the guy back to know what the position is fully. So all in all, I end up taking it and going to Santa Clara, and I'm there for a season, and the head coach is let go. He had been there 9 years, so a year into basketball, and I'd already experienced what is the toughest part, and that's being let go and having to look for a job again. So had a connection with an assistant at St. John's at the time, and St. John's didn't have a video coordinator spot, so I actually took a GA position that was very unique, was under Chris Mullen, and was able to do the video coordinator responsibilities, but also as a GA be down on the floor, which we had a staff that had Chris Mullen, had Mitch Richmond, so 2 NBA Hall of Famers, and then one of our assistants was a player development coach that happened to be in the NBA before he came to St. John's. So it was a great time for me to learn about some on-the-court player development and really get my hands dirty with stuff like that. So it was a unique GA experience. Stayed on as DOBO after my GA. Just was fortunate enough that the previous DOBO left and Coach Mullen decided to keep me on. And then was even more fortunate within the last year. Coach Mullen actually resigned just after the Final Four last season because of some family stuff, and just didn't feel like he was all in it. And I was lucky enough to just stay on with Coach Anderson. Was around at the time helping with the current team and kind of overseeing everything just to give myself a chance. And there's a lot more that went into that itself, but all in all, I was just fortunate enough to be able to stay on. And so I'm currently in my 4th season at St. John's, 2nd as DOBO here.
Great, Coach. Thank you. Michael, you want to go ahead?
Sure. First, just kind of want to echo Chris's sentiments. I'm excited to be here and kind of talk about some of my experiences, and hope that I can connect with each one of you afterwards. I'll be happy to share my contact information. A little bit about my background. I started as a student manager at Boston College for Al Skinner back when they were transitioning to the ACC. Spent 3 years as a manager there, and then went 2 years as a graduate assistant at Providence directly after that, working for Keno Davis. And while there, my first year, one of our assistants was Pat Scarry. Pat got the job my second year to go to Pitt. Spent about 9 months with Pitt and Jamie Dixon, and then ended up getting the head coach position at Towson University in Maryland. And so when he got the job, my 2 years as a graduate assistant was ending. I got my MBA, and then we linked up, and I spent 5 years with him on his staff, and really was an incredible experience. We took over a program that had 17 straight losing seasons. We won 1 game my first year. We were 1-31. And then the second year, we set the NCAA record for year-to-year turnaround. We won 18 games. And then year 3, we set the school record for wins. So I was there for 5 years, and then have been with Coach Enfield here at USC since the summer of 2016, and are getting ready to enter into my 5th year here in LA.
Great, thank you. Just kind of moving right into some of the questions that we put together for you guys. You were both student managers, so what are some key points that you took away from your time as a manager that have helped you grow in your current role as a director of basketball operations?
Mike, you just got done talking, so I'll start us off here. I think a lot of what I did as a manager prepared me for my current role, prepared me for my GA position and into my ops spot. Just First of all, the manager mindset is something that I always kind of carry with me. No job's too big, no job's too small. I'm obviously eager to learn and grow always. I think most managers really are, but whatever it really takes to help the team win. Managers are a small part of what goes into winning, and I feel like ops isn't that much different. I would say the one thing, if I had to take one thing away from it, that's similar between my ops role and my time as a manager is in an ops position, you're never going to really get praised for stuff that you do, much like you're never really going to get praised as a manager. But if you do mess something up, you're going to get ridiculed for it, just like you were as a manager. So I think just having that mindset of staying on top of things, being very proactive and forward thinking as much as possible, that I started doing as a manager really carried over to my role as a director of ops.
Echo a lot of that. A lot of what my experience were as a manager, I took with me to be a graduate assistant. And then really into Towson when I was a video coordinator for a year and director of ops, kind of felt like I never lost those jobs, being a manager, being a GA, even though I was a director of ops. I can't take credit for it. It was on an ESPN game day sometime back in 2005, 2006. Game day followed around the Wake Forest managers. They did a segment and their slogan. So this goes back to them. I can't take full credit for it, but their slogan was "Nobody knows what we do until we don't do it." A lot of that is kind of what Chris was talking about, and that's a lot of what being a manager, being a GA, being somebody in sports staff, all the way through a director of ops is. When you're on the road, everybody knows that the bus is supposed to be there when the plane lands. Well, if the bus isn't there, then you start to get questions. And so that's the types of things that kind of arise, when things don't go according to plan. So as far as being a manager, I think just your organizational and time management skills, balancing your academics with your responsibilities as a team, as a team member, as a manager, and then you observe and you develop best practices. You're constantly learning. You're constantly figuring out how things are done, how things are not done, and then taking those and applying them to how you best do things as your role as a director of ops, and kind of making them your own.
Gotcha. I want to stay on that the managers type topic. How are you guys investing in your GAs and managers, and what can they do to invest in themselves?
That's a great question. I'll start. I try to have a personal relationship with each one of them. We carry about 10 per year at USC, and each has a varying level of responsibilities based on experience and seniority and things like that. We spend a lot of time together off the court, away from practice. Try to have them come by our offices just to hang out, to get to know them on a personal level, and then really try to figure out what their goals are. We have 3 or 4 managers who want to be involved because it's an activity and it's a way to stay close to their roots as a USC student. And we have some that actually want to get into coaching. And so learning what each manager has aspirations of can really help target some of the things that you want to invest with them and help them along. And maybe what their goals are, you give them a few different responsibilities, and then how they can invest in themselves. There's no better, especially if you want to coach as a manager, there's no better long-term interview than being a manager. Try to impress that upon our own managers who are interested in becoming a GA, video coordinator, ops down the line. The time to interview is not after you've graduated. The time to interview is your freshman year, your sophomore year, your junior year, your senior year, when you're around those people that can help you get jobs and help make decisions on your own staff and connect you with some other people.
Yeah, I mean, Mike really summed up a lot of that. I would say the biggest thing is, for myself and our staff, we try and really get to know our managers on a super personal level. For me personally, I rely on them for a lot of stuff. We give them all a bunch of different roles and responsibilities, like Mike said, kind of based on seniority and what they can handle, and also what they're looking to get into. But also, I mean, we spend a lot of time playing pickup and hanging out with each other on the road and things like that. I try to get to know them in more of some lighthearted settings, just to see who they are as a person, and kind of pick their brain more on their families and everything like that. Just because I feel like that's what the Kansas coaches did to me, and I definitely would not be where I'm at without those guys. And so um, it's really important for me to look out for our managers and our GAs, and kind of really echoing off what Mike said. I think the best thing that managers can do is just put themselves out there and be willing to be vulnerable, and go into coaches' offices, whether it's myself or support staff people or even assistant coaches, and just, hey, what can I help with today? Because you never know. As a manager early on, I know that that's really awkward, because for me it was the same way. But as time goes on, you get more comfortable, and you just never know what they're going to ask of you. And even doing the most minute, small things that you might not think are important or stand out to them, it helps build a relationship and it helps build trust. And so the next time they're looking for something to get done and a support staff person's busy or the GAs aren't around, they're going to look to a manager who they know they can trust. So just building those relationships and having them really get to know you is going to pay dividends down the line, because it goes well beyond basketball. I mean, for so many coaches, they're connected well beyond basketball. If you're at a college level school, you're going to have some sort of alumni development, people like that, who the coach can connect you to someone that's a donor or in alumni relations, and they could connect you to someone in the field. It goes well beyond basketball. So I think that what you do as a manager, and the time you put in, and what you invest in it, you'll really get out of it at the end, as long as you're doing things the right way and putting in the hard work.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Thank you both. We talked about like the communication. You guys sound like you have really good communication with your managers. How do you communicate and handle your communication with the players and the other coaches on the staff?
So I would say for me, it's I spend a lot of time on my iPhone. I have a group chat with all of our players. That's really just myself, the strength coach, and our GAs, and that's where I send out our daily schedule. And when the players have issues, they text through there or they text me individually. So I spend a lot of time communicating with them there. Coach Anderson has something really unique that I've never had a staff that I've been a part of do. That he has each of our athletes, each day that they're in class, they have to come in at least an hour before practice. They have to come in and sign in the office at our secretary's desk. And when they do, they just come in, say what's up to whoever's in the office at the time, coaches and stuff. So you really interact with your guys a lot more that way, because it kind of forces them to. But they end up kind of joking around with you, catching up with you in your office, things like that. And you can just, hey, how are things? So that opens up just another line of communication, and builds some more trust there. As far as our staff goes, it's a lot of telephone calls, especially right now, calls and texts, and we meet a few times a week. But I'm kind of the middleman between everything, whether it's our players and our staff, or our staff and our managers, or our staff and our administration. I kind of play the middleman for all of it, but for the most part, it's just me on my phone spending probably too much time.
Yeah, I think you can never over communicate in your program, whether it's with your players, your staff members, your support staff members. Usually an email is followed by phone calls, texts. I never assume, you can never really assume that somebody on your staff or your players has gotten an email, gotten a text, especially now, just when you're missing that personal in-office communication. So really just making sure that all of our platforms are available to us. We use Teamworks. Some might use Team Synced, text messages, phone calls, FaceTimes, Zooms, whatever you can to, especially during this time, to stay up with everybody, and just making sure that everybody knows what's going on. It's easy to miss a text. It's easy to miss an email, and just making sure you over communicate, in the absence of that personal daily connection that we normally get in the office.
Gotcha. I want to transition to travel since it's a pretty big part of being a DOBO. Um, can you just go through travel, like hotels and flights, food, everything that encompasses travel?
Sure. I think first and foremost, like anything that you do, travel is so much of, you need to understand what's important to your boss, and no matter uh, what you may think is the right move, the right time to fly, the right hotel, the right practice time, no matter what, at the end of the day, it comes down to what's important to your boss, what your boss wants to do, and you build your schedule and you build the elements of a team travel, off that. It regardless of whether you charter, are taking a commercial flight, um, or a bus trip local. As far as the elements of it, in terms of hotels, again, figuring out what's important, what types of hotels, are in the area, what type of hotel your boss wants to stay at, proximity, to campus, to nightlife, to downtown, what's around. Really important to understand some of those things. And then as far as hotels, what's important to be negotiating? Is it meeting space? Is it Wi-Fi? Is it an amenity for your head coach to make sure he feels comfortable? Um, uh, any one of those things. Late checkouts, for your rooms, early check-ins, things like that. And then with flights, when do you want to fly? Are you practicing before you leave? Are you practicing after you leave? Meals. Do you want to eat? Is coach somebody who wants to eat out because it fosters, a little bit more camaraderie with your guys on the bus, getting to the meal, things like that? Or is it something in the hotel where you just walk down, you grab food, and you can head back to your rooms, and it's very impersonal, things like that. So, as far as the nitty gritty, it really comes down to the importance of what your boss wants to take care of, and how he wants to manage that trip, and how long you're on the road for.
Yeah, just to kind of piggyback off of that, I don't think it can be overstated, how important it is in understanding your boss and how he works and how your staff in general works. For me personally, Coach Anderson's he was very familiar with the SECs. He was there in a long time, but the Big East travel is a little different. We still charter a lot of places, but we have a little bit longer flights, and we have probably a few more buses than he's used to. So really getting to know him and understanding him, and from my standpoint, double and triple checking everything. So something gets set in stone a couple months out, and him and I and some other people on staff sit down and we plan out some travel stuff. But then as it gets closer, knowing my deadlines, I can adjust things a little bit ahead of time where I'm not waiting at the last minute. And he's saying, well, why are we doing that? And I'm saying, well, we figured this out a long time ago, but now he wants to change. So I feel like for me personally, I do a lot of double and triple checking, and I'm constantly in communication with the contact for our charter company or our hotel contact on when we're arriving, and making sure meals will be available if we're having a meal there. Or like Mike said, if you're going out to eat, myself or one of our GAs or potentially a manager are going to a restaurant early and making sure apps are on the table so that we can get in and out of a restaurant, trying to get private rooms, negotiating all sorts of different things from that standpoint. And I think a big part of the meals for me personally is having our strength coach involved and making sure that it fits the mold for what type of food we want our athletes eating, and what coach likes to eat, making sure that there's an option for him, and our staff, and just making sure as many people as possible are pleased and happy. Because I think the biggest thing about being an ops guy, whether it's the plane or the bus or the timing of everything, is as long as everyone just remains focused on the game and winning, that's the end goal. So if things go smoothly and you're not hearing any negative feedback, that's about as good as it's going to get for you. So I think just you got to map that stuff out well in advance and stay on top of it, and just do your best to keep as many people as possible happy. Not everyone's going to be happy all the time, but it starts with your boss and making sure that things are good and comfortable for him. And then everything is good and comfortable for your student athletes so that they can focus on the game, and they're not bringing anything up that makes them uncomfortable or not prepared to play.
Yeah, you just mentioned, making sure your head coach and your players are comfortable. What are things that you both do for your assistants and head coach on a daily, weekly basis that maybe is not in your job description, but you do it anyway?
Great question. I think a lot of that is knowing the personalities of your guys on staff, of everybody on your staff, not just your head coach, what they're what's important to them. If they're trying to work on a scout, it's getting them some video early before they know they need it, or getting them some information about some things that are upcoming. Hey, our guys have to go to this meeting tonight at 8:00, and so that they're not blindsided by some things at practice that you talk about with your guys afterwards. Making sure that everybody knows what's going on. More so anything, I don't know if it's necessarily doing things for them, but making sure that they have all the information that they need, that they don't know they need, and keeping them up to date with everything that's going on. That could be something as simple as birthdays, as somebody coming by the office, somebody that's going to come to practice that day, so that making sure that they have all the information that they need before they know they need it.
Yeah, I would agree with what Mike said. I think a lot of it depends on your staff, and I think the other part that I would say is trying to solve as many things as possible that doesn't necessarily need to get to your staff or your head coach. I think there are a lot of things that go on in a program, especially with your players, that that coaches don't need to know about. It doesn't need to be another stressor for your assistants who are trying to deal with recruiting, or your head coach that's got a lot on his plate. I think as much stuff that I personally or our support staff can solve on our own, that we know is stuff that, hey, coach would be okay with, or this doesn't need to get to coach. The more forward thinking and proactive we can be on that stuff, the better. I don't think there's anything specific that I do on a daily or weekly basis that goes out of the way just to please those guys, but I just try and be as proactive as possible on anything and everything. And a lot of that, like Mike said, comes from just understanding those guys and how they work, and when are they getting into the office, or what do they like having on their desk for their scout, whatever the case may be. I'm just making sure that even if it's not my job necessarily, whoever's job it is, they're handling it, and I'm almost double checking that at some points. That way they don't come in frustrated for no reason.
I'd like to stay on that topic, and I'm just curious, what is the most difficult task you've had to complete that your head coach has asked you to do?
Well, probably the most difficult task is when this all. I'll give you two. I think when this whole thing hit with the COVID-19, and our conference tournament was canceled Thursday morning. The objective from the top, from the head coach, was we need to get our travel party home to LA as quickly as possible. And there's no blueprint for that, as there isn't for a lot of the stuff um, that has happened over the last 2 months. But just the charge of getting our travel party home from Las Vegas to Los Angeles and getting them home safely and in a timely manner, and everybody's included, because if you have more people than have seats on a plane, that doesn't help you. So getting everybody back safely to campus as soon as we knew that our conference tournament was hit was probably the most difficult task, and getting that done within 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah, I would say that the coronavirus presented a lot of unique experiences for Mike and I both. Mine wasn't necessarily as bad just because we're actually playing in New York, but we were at halftime of a game, which made it rather interesting because we came into a locker room that the Big East decided to call the game on, and I was basically told, "Hey, the game's canceled. Now what are we doing?" And ours was more of getting guys to campus, but also within that same day, we were trying to get some of our players home to their home with their parents within the next 24 hours of that. So that was interesting because players have so many questions and your staff has so many questions, and they're all trying to communicate with you, but you can only be in touch with so many people at one time. But just to provide a little bit different insight, we talked about this, a couple of us, a little bit before everyone else was on here, but I would say one of the toughest things that's ever been asked of me is we were traveling to San Francisco this year to play Arizona. We were actually going 2 days early because it was Christmas break. So we played the night before and we were flying out earlier in the day, the next day, and jump on a 6-hour flight that doesn't have Wi-Fi. And we're going to head to the hotel and drop our bags and go to practice. And as we land, checking my phone, and the coach who's D2 school we were supposed to practice at is now closed because of a bomb threat. So trying to find a gym in an hour in a city you're not super familiar with and don't know a ton of people was rather interesting. But I think as a DOBO, you kind of spend a lot of time acting very quickly. So it wasn't too entirely stressful. And your staff knows the circumstances that they put you in. So
Yeah, both great responses. What are your roles during the game? Could you just kind of walk us through a game day and maybe what you do during the 40 minutes also as well?
During the games, it's kind of game management for our staff, just in terms of timeouts, fouls, uh, who the officials are for that game, free throw percentages, 3-point percentages. Um, Sometimes, tracking what if we're playing them a second time and we've had a chance to, you play in the first time, you get some, whether play calls if that's important to your head coach. Tracking that, tracking plus minus in real time. Those are some of the things that we've done um, in game during the 40 minutes. And then really the rest of game day is just kind of about making sure that everything is running smoothly, that there's no other there's activity going on the court, an hour before shoot around. If you play in a space that is used by multiple teams or has some outside events that kind of come and go, making sure that every piece of game day is ready to go, that the jerseys are hung when they're supposed to be, and the uniforms are ready to go. We at SC, we have somebody on staff that speaks an hour before to a group of donors and season ticket holders. And so making sure that they're getting there on time and then back for when we meet as a team before 45 minutes or 47 minutes before tip off, and that everybody is staying on task and knows what the next step is. If coach or one of our assistants has a TV interview, making sure that that's being done, but also making sure that it's out of the way for what the normal day-to-day activity or game day activity is. So really kind of just being prepared and being on your toes and being able to adapt as things happen.
Yeah, I would say my biggest game day responsibility is just trying to maintain routine as much as possible. After you understand what your head coach wants on game day and kind of wants the players to be doing, you just gotta do whatever you can to maintain that. So making sure all those things are falling into place on time, that everyone's where they need to be, and things are running smoothly so that everyone can focus on the game is the biggest thing. From my personal standpoint, as far as the 40 minutes of actual game, my main responsibility is actually the play calls. So um, I sit at the front of the bench and I'm almost kind of fine tuned in with the other team's point guard and their head coach and whoever's calling the plays, and trying to help our guys out, both on the floor and as a staff, to see what they're running and what they're trying to do at different times. And like Mike said, keeping track of timeouts and fouls for both teams, anything like that, officials, pretty similar stuff to what Mike said. Just maintaining routine is the biggest thing on game day and making sure things go smoothly and we don't have any hiccups that could cause a distraction for our guys or for our staff, so that the main focus is on the game and trying to win.
Gotcha. I'm curious, especially this is kind of a time where you guys are wrapping up scheduling and all that stuff. So I'm curious, how do you personally use analytics or anything, any sort of scouting into creating your season schedule?
We use some analytics. We actually have recently used a consulting third party to kind of help us forecast some opponents down the line. But I think in scheduling, just as much as analytics, it's kind of important to know what type of team you have coming back for that next year. What are you scheduling for? What are your goals? Are you scheduling to be an at-large team? Are you scheduling to reach a benchmark in wins, which oftentimes go together, but sometimes they don't? Are you trying to play more home games versus more road games? Are you in an MTE? And so figuring out how to test your team in the non-conference preparation for the conference season really depends on a host of factors. The analytics are good. I think sometimes people get wrapped up in them a little bit too much, because you have to have a feel and an understanding of what your goals are, what type of team you have, and what's surrounding it. This year we're going to 20 games in our league, and we're playing 2 league games right around Thanksgiving, the Sunday after Thanksgiving, and then the following Saturday. Those usually are 2 marquee weekends for bigger games that for a variety of reasons. Now those are off limits to you because you have to save those for conference. So how are you going to adapt and move your schedule around? Are you okay with playing 4 games in 8 days? We went through a scenario this year where we really liked the game, but the date just didn't fit. So is it the date that's important, or is it the opponent that's important? And sometimes those don't always match up. And so figuring out that relationship between an opponent, its location, but also the date, is a relationship that sometimes works and it sometimes doesn't, and you have to be able to choose and adapt and pivot depending on what your head coach is looking for.
Yeah, I mean, Mike killed that answer, but I would say understanding your team first and foremost. Are you young? Are you old? How good do you guys feel like you're going to be? And then how many games have you already previously locked into coming into that year? So for us, we have a challenge with the Big 12 every year. And this year we happen to be on the road for it. And then we're in the Gavitt games, which is a challenge with the Big 10. And we're at home for that this year. So you're already in 2 non-conference games there. We're in an MTE, which those games for MTEs can vary. You could be in a 2 or 3, and it could include other games on the side. So that's where we start our focus at. And then from there, we kind of base things around that. Much like Mike said, we're going to 20 games next year. And so that's presented a different obstacle that we haven't faced before. And our league has basically had some hold dates. They hadn't given us specific dates initially. So we had some hold dates where we kind of did our best to schedule around them until we knew specific dates. And once we had those dates, we kind of trying to decide, okay, if this one's at home, but we don't know the opponent, how close we want to play to that game, who do we want to play, how good of a team do we want to play, things like that. Finals always comes into play, just because you have to schedule around your finals, give your guys plenty of time for that sort of thing. Games before Christmas break, and when are you guys going to want to go home? How quickly after Christmas break do you guys play? So how long of a break do you guys want to have? Everything like that plays into it. As far as analytics go, our staff kind of has a template, and this is actually something that Coach Anderson, our associate head coach, has been with Coach Anderson for quite some time now. And then one of our support staff guys who's also really familiar with Coach, they kind of brought it along. And it's a template that basically just shows us who this team, we do it for a bunch of teams that we've been in contact with, and we just see who's returning, their points per game, assists, things of that nature, who they're adding. And obviously that's something that's kind of fluid. So we may reach out to a team early on in the middle or early part of our season, but then they add a transfer a semester, or they lose a kid. They get some commitments, things like that. So we're constantly updating those to see who they're adding and see how good they could potentially be. Because sometimes you want a tougher game, and sometimes you want a game that if you're gonna pay for them, you want to be able to have a good chance to beat them and not make yourselves look bad. And then I would say the unique thing for us is just having 2 home venues. We play some of our games at Madison Square Garden, so and the number of games at the Garden varies. So we have an on-campus site, 5,700 people. It's a solid atmosphere for college basketball. Fans are right on top of you. But we also have Madison Square Garden, which is everybody wants to play there. We have teams reach out nonstop every year to do home and home so they can play at the Garden and things like that. But it's about deciding, one, how many conference games you want to play at the Garden and how many conference games your league would like you to play at the Garden. And then trying to figure out, do we want to include a large non-conference game there, or St. John's is a lot of times been in what's called the Holiday Fest, which takes place at the Garden, and it's typically a doubleheader with 4 total teams, or just a one-day thing. So finding an opponent for that, and we don't always play it, but sometimes we do. So the 2 venues kind of makes it interesting because we're kind of third on the totem pole when it comes to the Garden. You have the Knicks, you have the Rangers, and then you have us. So for us, we could schedule an opponent, and it may be a flex site where if the Garden has it open, we're going to play you there. But if not, it may not work out. So our non-conference wise, our league helps us a little bit with the Garden stuff, and our relationship with Madison Square Garden's been around a long time, but there's a lot that goes into that, just having 2 separate venues and what that means for us and coordinating all of that.
Yeah, that's really good. Thank you for sharing that unique situation. We're going to open up into viewer questions. So you can raise your hand. There's like a little button on the chat feature, or you can type in the chat that you have a question. Eric Rigg, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, so in terms of strictly basketball work, what's probably your biggest challenge you face like week to week throughout the season, either from your head coach or just like based off your program overall?
When you say basketball, do you mean like how to be involved in basketball?
Yeah, just like, because how you mentioned like the travel stuff, like more in terms of basketball, whether it's like your practice, like daily practices, or like your video work throughout the week.
Yeah, I mean, it's one in a support staff. I think that's the biggest conundrum we face as a support staff, as ops, as video coordinator. You can't be on the floor. You can't be in that teaching role. But how do you stay up with your basketball acumen? Being in meetings is really important. Being present in practice. There's a tendency as a support staff member as an ops, as a player development, player personnel, whatever your title is, to, okay, hey, I got a couple hours when nobody's in the office. I got to go get this done and go do it when you're not at practice. So being around and just being involved in that regards, keeping stats. I keep stats a lot at practice. I run the clock every now and then because it keeps me engaged and keeps me as a member, of the coaching staff that's involved in the basketball. But again, that's probably that's the hardest thing to navigate for a lot of people in support staff. Managers, not so much because you can be on the floor, GAs and things like that. But as somebody who is a specific support staff member, not being able to be on the floor or coaching, just being able to stay around, I think is the biggest thing when it comes to that.
Yeah, I would agree completely. I won't hit on it too much. I would say scouts is the biggest thing. For me personally, we don't have a video coordinator, so we have two GAs who do some of our video work, and then myself and another support staff member. So for me personally, I do all of our scouts. I do every third scout with one of our assistants. So really locking in on those and focusing in on anything I can basketball wise with him and running with it. But then also watching the film on the scouts that aren't even my responsibility and helping out with those and having an input is probably the biggest thing from a basketball standpoint. Because just like Mike said, because of NCAA rules, we can't be down on the court. So there's only so much you can do during practice itself. So I would say that film plays a big part in that. And even now in the off season, trying to help our assistants with different player development stuff and video projects, anything that can help them basketball wise, gives me a chance to kind of have my hands in the basketball side of things. So it's definitely one of our tougher tasks as ops guys, trying to stay involved there.
Scott, you want to ask your question?
Yeah. Hey, coach. So, what are some of the biggest things that you guys look for in a student when you're going to go and bring on or hire a new manager into your programs?
Great question. One, I would say the biggest thing we look for is availability, and then because if you've got classes that don't match with practice times or for whatever reason, or if you're involved in two or three other things, and you can only be at a practice or two every week, we try to stay with somebody whose availability is 3, 4, or 5 times a week. We don't ask managers to be at every practice, but to me, availability is key. And then you quickly find out, kind of from being around practices, around the office, who really wants it, and so you can kind of gauge the passion of each manager. It's a little bit more subjective, but we tend to look at two things in the hiring process: your availability, what else you're involved in, and then kind of your track record as a student. Have you been full time? Are you part time, or things like that, which would preclude you from being a manager? We look at overall GPAs because we think your academic progress is a good indicator of the level of work ethic that you're going to bring to our program every day, that you bring to your personal studies. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, and we look at both of those things, as well as I think social media plays a big part in it. A manager's involved in so many different aspects of your program, and they know when guys are hurt at practice or things of that nature that doesn't always get out to the public. You say you have a fight at practice, you have a player get in trouble off the court, whatever the case may be, stuff that doesn't need to go public. And so you have to keep there's a lot of confidentiality that's involved in it, and you don't want someone who's too big of a fan that may let that overtake their role. But you also you got to really watch and censor who you bring into a program. And from our standpoint, we think that's really important. We have our current head manager and our GAs and myself and another staff member, we kind of go through and monitor social media. And if things come up before the hiring process, or even after a kid's become a manager, we try and kind of nip it in the bud and be as confidential as possible in our program, because those things are so interesting when it comes down to it.
Great responses. Coach T, you have a question. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you. So my question is, who were or are some of your mentors, and what advice have they given you that stuck?
As far as mentors, I still speak regularly with my high school coach, a lot. Some of our assistants that I've worked for that are now head coaches, Pat Scarry, Andy Enfield, obviously my current boss. I speak to Pat. I haven't worked for him in 5 years, but I speak to him regularly. Um, the the guy at Boston College, Dan McDermott, who hired me when I first got there, is still with the program, still the director, or has moved up into the director of operations role, and still very close to him. I text him, call him every now and then. Hey, how are you guys doing this? Or what are you doing this? Or how have you changed doing this? How have you evolved your role? And anybody that I've worked for, that I've worked with, I've been able to take a few things from. And I think the important thing is taking things from your mentor or somebody that you worked with or who it is, and making it part of what you do, but make sure you're comfortable in the way that you do it. And so, some of the things that your mentor may impart on you, you may not like, or you might want to tweak before you begin to implement. So I think there's a variety of ways you can utilize mentors, and then keeping a close relationship with them. Not always about basketball, and staying up to date on their families and things like that.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the biggest people in my life, basketball wise, are those I've worked with or worked for. I wouldn't be where I'm at without those people. They're the people I go to when I have tough questions, either about how they're doing things or potential job opportunities, stuff like that. If something comes up and I'm like, this is a tough decision, I have a certain group of coaches that I just kind of lean on. And some of those people are from Kansas, and some of them are from my year at Santa Clara and my time at St. John's, and even people I've met in the business that I've just developed a close relationship with over time. I just lean on different people like that. And I think what Mike said is really, really important, especially to just growing in this business, taking the good and the bad, because there's going to be a lot of stuff that coaches that you're around do that you don't agree with or you don't think is effective. And obviously some of that stuff, it could be effective and you may not think it is, but sometimes it's stuff that you're like, we keep doing this over and over again and it doesn't seem to be working. So you tell yourself, hey, I want to avoid that when I'm in a different role or whenever I have the opportunity to get to that level. So I think taking all the experience that you can, and the good with the bad, and really looking back on it and taking apart the pieces that you do like, and the really good ones, building them into habit and finding ways to better yourself from those people who have been successful with those things. I think that's really important.
And I'll just say one more thing to that. A couple of the people that I consider my closest mentors aren't even in men's basketball anymore. They were at one point. One was a director of operations at another school. He was a little bit older than myself, and I leaned on him and known him through the camp circuit and got to stay really close and friendly. And to this day, I will still ask him questions about how he did things, even though he's in development now. And then my roommate for a long time was in women's basketball as an assistant coach. And so I don't be afraid to look for mentors outside of the business as well. Outside of strictly of your sport or of your profession. I think those can be equally as important.
Megan, you can unmute yourself.
Hey, Coach Huey. I was just wondering, you were talking about how you guys don't have a direct video coordinator. And with the team that I currently work with, we don't have a video coordinator as well. So we're trying to divvy up who's doing the scouts how we're going to do them exactly. If we want one guy doing the preliminary stuff and then another guy looking at a different aspect of or just cutting up things in synergy and creating different custom edits. So what have you guys found is the most effective with you guys kind of rotating through doing scouts, as far as breaking things up, or just one person doing all of it, or whatever you guys do?
Yeah, so I would say I've been a part of both sides because at my time at St. John's, I've actually worked for two separate staffs. So our first staff under Coach Mullen, myself, an assistant coach, and our other GA at the time, we did all of the scouts. So we didn't divide the scouts up amongst the assistants at all. The three of us just went from scout to scout. I would say that's very tiring, and it's hard to stay out ahead and really feel like you're prepared to play teams when you're doing every single scout. So I think divvying it up is really helpful, because if not, you guys are going to be putting in a lot of hours. I've been through it. As far as divvying it up goes, we have a GA who kind of does he oversees our practice film. He oversees our pregame and postgame film as far as our own personal stuff. And then scouts wise, we divvy it up, myself, that GA, and another support staff member. Each of us works with one of our assistant coaches. So we feel like every third scout kind of gives you, and a lot of staffs do that every third scout and divide it up between your assistants, but every third scout kind of gives us as the video person enough time to prepare to get everything the assistant needs, and us and the assistant meet a couple times before it ever gets to Coach Anderson. So I feel like that works really effectively for us, but I feel like everybody kind of does it a little bit differently.
Thank you.
Megan, do you want to go next?
Yeah, hi. So a thing that I've really thought about is how to set myself apart, being a manager and pursuing a role in sports and with a basketball team. So how do you guys find that you set yourselves apart?
That's a great question. I think I've always been of the belief that your work ethic and your availability set yourself apart between you and your peers. Availability to me is the number one thing. If you're always able to pick up the phone and be the person they can rely on to get things done, you're going to go from being the third person they call to the second to the first. And oftentimes it's not going to get past you anymore. And then I think just your consistent work ethic, your quality of work. You get things done in a timely manner, but you don't do it to sacrifice quality. You make sure the job gets done. And I think after you do that enough, you have a proven track record and you can build upon that, and you'll start to separate yourself. Certainly, I've been on staffs where managers will sometimes focus their efforts all on one assistant, and sometimes there's other people that have spread their efforts out. And I think there's merits to both, but I think having a relationship with each person on your staff so that they know you can be the person to go to is a big thing.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off that. And Ashton, you've probably heard this before, but my boss at Kansas when I was a manager wasn't actually someone who was on the basketball staff, but it was the head equipment guy. And he used to always kind of give us a metaphor of a stovetop, and there's only two burners on top of it. And there's three things you have to decide between. It's basketball, it's academics, and it's your social life. And for me personally, and the managers that I think are successful, and as bad as this may sound, a lot of time I sacrifice social life for the basketball stuff. Just was around the facilities as much as possible, whether it's players wanting to get in the gym and they don't want to shoot on the gun. They want somebody to rebound for them. So you're not only building a relationship with the player, but a lot of times your staff is going to see that as well. Like, man, he's always around, but also availability for the staff. not only if they call, but if they see you around, even if you're stopping by in between classes, stuff like that, just being visible and being available. That's where it all starts. And I think what Mike says is huge. Trying to build a relationship with everybody on your staff, because your staff is going to have a bunch of different strengths and weaknesses, and whether it's your assistants and one may be particularly good at recruiting and one may be particularly good at player development, or whatever the case may be. Building relationships with all of them, because each of them you could learn from, and they could present you with connections down the line, uniquely between everybody on your staff. So I think that's a huge part of it. And I think the biggest thing as a manager is just building up the courage to make yourself vulnerable. You got to be able to put yourself out there, probably take on some jobs that you may not initially know how to do, but hey, I'm going to figure this out on the fly and make sure it's done right and done timely, like Mike said, and just continue to build trust that way, and more will be asked of you. Because the more you're around and the more trust you build, the more they're going to go to you for stuff. And there's almost always stuff to be done. I mean, for me personally, I like to try and take on as much as possible. That's just who I am as a person. But if managers are around and there's someone I trust and they say, hey, can I help you with something? I'm happy to give them something if I know they're going to get it done right, and I don't have to double check it down the line. So I think just building that trust and that genuine relationship with your staff is huge.
Gotcha. Nate, you got a question?
Yeah. This is for either one of the coaches here. I just wanted to ask, like, for a Division II manager that doesn't really get some of the experience working with D1 players and D1 staff, and also like the game day prep that a D1 manager would get, what are some of the experience and some of the things you would recommend someone who's trying to like separate themselves and also get the experience of to try to be an asset to a D1 school, maybe for like as a GA or even a graduate manager, or anything where like they can learn is scouting or video, or what would you say would best separate themselves and make them really useful to you guys?
I think that the biggest thing, from me personally and my experience as a GA, but also the GAs that I've been around, if you can learn synergy and sports code, it's obviously a huge help. Not every program is going to have sports code, but sports code is an expensive product. But in general, most programs do, and it's really great to have that experience and be able to do that when you first come in. I think the more GAs that can do graphics are great. For me personally, that wasn't something that I could do at all. I mean, literally nothing about Photoshop or anything, and I'm still slowly teaching myself, but I think more and more programs are looking for someone who can help with their social media and their graphics, and not even necessarily for their specific team social media, but potentially for their coaching staffs and stuff you can send out to recruits and stuff like that. As far as just building connections and stuff go, I think it's great to work other schools' camps. Not only do you meet the other schools' managers, but it's a potential for you to interact with the other school staffs and meet new people. There's a lot of internship opportunities in the NBA or with different player development programs, impact basketball, things like that I think are great as well. But I think camps are a great way to kind of diversify yourself and meet a bunch of different people if you can afford to do so. I personally wasn't able to when I was at Kansas. I stuck around there, and that was just my path. But I think that a lot of people have benefited from the connections they make during camp.
Yeah, I think one, you mentioned specifically Division II, but if it's a low major, mid major, oftentimes you have to wear more hats. And so you get yourself involved in a lot more things on a day-to-day basis that you might not get at somewhere else. And so being able to diversify yourself into whether it's game day setup, it's the basketball aspect of it. Like Chris said, you're proficient in video. To me, the biggest thing, the biggest trend is graphic design. I mean, I've tried to self-teach myself Photoshop over the last couple months. That's been a big emphasis, for myself, growing myself in terms of what value I can add to our own staff. I think anybody coming up in the business now would be crazy not to get a license, a Photoshop license for themselves, and go at their own pace and teach themselves and tutorials and check which classes are being offered. Maybe there's a intro to graphic design class that can be taught on campus that you can take as an elective. That stuff that's becoming really, really valuable. And just the number of things that you can be involved with that I think, going back to the Division II piece of it, or whatever level, the more things you can be involved in, the more valuable you become to your current employer, your next employer, or wherever your goals are in basketball or outside of it.
Great. We have one more viewer question. Zach, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thanks, Ashton. This is Zach Friesman, Director of Ops at Winthrop. Somebody asked me this question, and truthfully, I didn't have a good answer, so I was wondering if one of you guys do. How do you look for your next opportunity while remaining loyal to your current staff and coach?
That's a great question. It's a little bit of a conundrum. I've kind of been fortunate in my career where jobs have presented themselves to me, and so I wasn't necessarily going out and looking for a job. But I think every time you build a relationship with somebody, you are indirectly interviewing for a potential next job. Certainly jobs come available and they get posted and things like that, but your network of people that you're going to know about a job that way before it's ever posted online. And chances are when it's posted online, it's already too late. So I think I'd be cautious to mistake building relationships as a way to, the way you build relationships is how you get your next job, how you understand, how that coach might work, what that coach might be looking for, when the job is becoming available, if it's becoming available. It's some of the back channel conversations, so that you're ready for it when the time comes. And I think that building those relationships with certain people, assistants, head coaches, ops guys. A lot of time people want to build relationships with a head coach. That's important, and he's obviously the one. It's his staff or it's her staff, and they're going to be the ones making the decision. But who can be an advocate for you? Sometimes it's the assistant. Sometimes it's the ops guy that's leaving. Sometimes it's the video guy. Who's been with that head coach longest? Has your head coach been as the program that has the open position? Has that head coach been there for 8 years and there's one guy on staff that's been with him the whole time? That guy probably has his ear. So knowing who can kind of be have the ear of the head coach, and I think just relationships in general. The more you put yourself out there and get to know people, and across different conferences, leagues, levels, will help you find out about those jobs, and then put yourself in a position to potentially be in line to get that job.
Yeah, and I think Mike, you did a really good job answering that. I think from my standpoint, just especially with your own staff, and the staff you're currently working for and working with, I think it's important for them to know what you want to do. For me as an ops guy, I wanted my next goal is to be an assistant coach. So making sure my assistants are aware of that, my head coach and my assistants are aware of that, and the other people that I'm close with in basketball, and that can speak on my behalf and know me personally, but also working wise, can say, hey, this is a good fit. I think another key thing is just being realistic. Some jobs may not be attainable. Some jobs may not be a great fit. And your assistants and those people around you, they may say, hey, this guy has an assistant opening. I can recommend you, but I don't know that it's a great fit, or he or she may be on the brink of being fired. They may have 1 year left. Those people are going to shoot you straight. And if they have a relationship with that coach, they'll either stick their neck out for you, or they'll tell you, hey, I don't think this is a good move for you. But I think just the genuine relationships are the biggest key by far, because like Mike said, so many jobs before they're ever posted, before they even come open, when there's rumors going around that a coach may take another job or have an opening, that person's already in contact with other people. We're trying to get a list together of people that may fit that role. And so I think just genuine relationships are the biggest key, but making sure that the people around you and the people that can speak on your behalf, they know that that's your goal and that's what you want. And then if something becomes available that you may not personally hear about, they can say, oh, I have the perfect guy, and come to you with it, or pass your information along to that coach who has an opening.
Thank you both for those answers. Thank you to the viewers also. Really glad you had some great questions. Just wrapping up, just pulling everything together, Chris and Michael, what are some last nuggets you want to share with us for those that are aspiring to maybe be a DOBO one day, be in the basketball industry?
I think just, and I use my own experience from this, everybody's path is different. How you get to where you are. And I'll use a perfect example. I was graduating from BC. I was, as a manager, I didn't have the next job yet. I was not in line for a graduate assistant position at Providence. That job hadn't come available. One of our assistants at Boston College had set me up to be to interview with the Division III head coach. He had just gotten the job. I was good. It was basically, the interview was basically to check the box. I was going to be the guy, Division III assistant coach, get on the floor right away, and it was going to be great. And the night before the interview, the head coach called and said, "Hey, I have an old friend in the business who really wants the job, and I've offered it to him, and I've accepted it." And I was crushed, and because I thought I had geared myself up. That's what I wanted to do. I was going to be an assistant. I was going to be on the floor. It was all in my mind. It was all lined up, and I went from basically thinking I had the job to now having no job and going and trying to figure out what was next. And I actually figured out about the graduate assistant position being open at Providence on Twitter. That's kind of when Twitter was just gaining legs, and coaches were starting to use it as a recruiting tool. And that's how that took off. So, just because one door closes, it's discouraging in the moment, but another door can open. And don't be afraid to explore all opportunities. And I think it was Megan who asked, how do you separate yourself? You can separate yourself in how you approach the job. And I'll just use this as an example. It's my own experience. And I had the benefit of growing up an hour from Providence's campus. But the day after the position was posted on Twitter, I drove down to campus and I asked to see if I could get in front of Coach Davis, who was the head coach at the time. And he was more than generous in his time. And I got 15 minutes audience with the head coach of Providence before I even really ever knew what I was doing. And about a year later, it came up in conversation. We had talked about that, and there were 193 people apply for the job, and one person showed up in person, and he was impressed with that. And that was my way of differentiating myself. I'm sure I wasn't the most qualified candidate for that job, but I found a way to differentiate myself in that pursuit. And so there are different things you can do. I've heard of one guy printed his resume on a basketball and sent it to the head coach, and that's how he showed his desire and commitment. It was something different. It was memorable. And there are plenty of things like that. So I guess what I'll leave you with is that nobody's journey is the same as the next person. And you never know when an opportunity is going to arise, and just not to get discouraged if a door closes, because chances are another one's opening. You just don't see it yet. So I know that was a lot, but hopefully those are some good takeaways.
Yeah, I would say, first of all, that was Mike and I don't know each other very well. We've actually only talked one time before this, but my last takeaway would be comparison is the thief of joy. I think in this business, a lot of times you're going to see, especially when you're first getting into it, you're going to be in the mix. You're going to be applying for a bunch of different jobs. You're going to hear such and such got a job, or this person that was another manager at another school got a job, and you may feel like you're more qualified. And that's going to continue. That's how this business works. There's people who are going to get DOBO jobs ahead of you. There's people who are going to get assistant jobs ahead of you who are going to rise the ranks very quickly. I think the biggest thing you can do for yourself is not compare yourself to anybody else. Because much like what Mike said, there's no set path. I feel like a lot of times, so many people ask me, like, what's the best way you would say to get to your position? And I don't have a set answer for that. I have my journey, which I took, which I feel like is unique. And there's people across the Big East, there's people across the country who they each have their own path to that same position. So I think as long as you have a goal, you need to continue to strive for it, but don't get discouraged by it. I have a similar story with Mike. My senior year, I probably started late, started looking for jobs late, kept missing out on opportunities. I didn't end up taking my internship with the Sixers, which was my initial position out of school. I didn't end up taking that until August. And it was something where I didn't even think I was going to get it. I kept interviewing and sending thank you notes to the Sixers staff. And I ended up interviewing 6 or 7 times with different staff members. And the last one I'm interviewing with an assistant coach, and he hands the phone to Brett Brown, who was the head coach. And I get offered the job, and I had no idea. I hadn't even really pondered the thought of even moving there. So you never know what's going to come with things. I think vulnerability is huge. Putting yourself out there and be willing to do whatever it takes, whether it's now during this time when we as coaches have some free time, and reaching out to people via Twitter, via Instagram, writing them a handwritten note. Obviously, some people are in the office and some aren't, but LinkedIn, whatever the case may be, putting yourself out there and trying to build relationships. And even if it's not someone you can consistently keep in contact with, just picking their brain for a day and some takeaways you may be able to get from that. Any chance you can get to grow and just being eager to strive for what you want is huge. And I'll just end with, and Mike said at the beginning, however I can help everybody who was on here, I'd love to share my personal information. Ashton, I don't know if you have all their emails and want to send out my phone number and email. You guys can feel free to reach out however you'd like. I'd love to help. I'd love to connect. You never know how we could help. So I'd love to help anybody who tuned in here.
Yes.